I'm Riley,
And I'm Ronnie,
and this is the Plan to Eat podcast.
where we have conversations about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you answer the question, what's for dinner? Hello, and welcome to the Plan to Eat podcast. We are back talking about salt, fat, acid, heat. We're doing our, what did I call it last time? Book club breakdown.
Yeah, book club breakdown.
And today we are on the fat section.
Well, my first note here is that beware of being hungry while reading this chapter. Because if you thought the first chapter wasn't delicious, then the second one is even more so, because just all the recipes she talks about, all the yummy ingredients, I just feel like I was reading it hungry and I just kept thinking, you need to keep reading. You're not going to go get a snack. But I just want the things she talks about. Everything she talks about, she describes in such a beautiful manner that you're just hungry and you want it.
And this chapter is a lot more about textures. I feel like there's a lot, or at least there's more discussion in this section about textures of food, which for whatever reason is like very like a mouth watering to like think about specific textures of food. So
Yeah, how to make crispy fried chicken, or how to make mayonnaise or aiolis or all the things.
well, I have a little summary. You want me to read it?
Yes, I'd love it.
'Kay.
I love your summaries.
Fat is the second element of good cooking and is essential for achieving the full spectrum of flavors and textures. Fat has 3 different roles: 1, main ingredient; 2, a cooking medium; and 3, as a seasoning, similar to salt. Fat carries flavor, which is why we add aromatics directly to fat. Think of garlic to oil or adding vanilla to butter. Different fats go best with different cuisines, and getting the combination right will enhance your cooking.
I love it. This is the section where she has the map. These are the appropriate cooking oils for the geographic region that you're cooking for, which I thought was a really helpful breakdown, especially, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like, is olive oil appropriate for this dish I'm making? And in some cases I was confirmed, yes, this is appropriate. And in some I was like, I need to mix that up a little bit. So
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because, in North America, our quote unquote options for using different oils for our cuisines is pretty broad.
yeah.
Like, I think it's like it can be olive oil, it could be butter, it could be lard, it could be seed oils.
Sesame oil.
Yeah. So it's like very broad, whereas there are other cultures where it's very specifically one type of
Yes.
fat they typically use, which is like very specifically olive oil or very specifically beef tallow or something like that.
Yeah, and this doesn't just, it's dairy products. Those are sources of fat, cheese, butter. Well, we already talked about butter, cream, things like that. Yummy.
Yeah. Avocados, eggs.
Eggs. That's another really good one.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found the most helpful in this book is, I feel like oils are really a hot topic. Oil, what you cook your food in, the temperature you cook your food in, and what oil can withstand that heat. Like, it can feel a little complicated. And also, I just feel like oil is a hot topic in culture right now. But one of the things I found really helpful is when she breaks down when olive oil becomes rancid and how to find the appropriate olive oil. Let's just talk about that one thing. She actually suggested that Costco's olive oil is a really awesome option. It like wins taste tests. But the way she broke it down is that you want to look at the production date of the olive oil, and it's typically in November. That's awesome, right? I didn't know that. And so good to know. And it goes rancid between 12 to 14 months after pressing. So just knowing that, even being able to look in your own pantry and say, is this good or is this bad? And when you're at the grocery store, just even like casually finding the correct bottle that has the longest date before it goes rancid, all those kinds of things. I feel like that was super helpful information. I'm going to use that in my shopping trips.
Yeah, this one, the first time that I read, so I mentioned last time that I read this book before. I didn't quite finish it the first time. So later in the book will be my first time reading it. But the first time that I read this chapter on fat, this was probably the most impactful thing for me, is that she said most Americans are accustomed to eating rancid olive oil.
Sad to read that.
Another thing is that a lot of times the olive oil that we buy at the grocery store is a mixture of olive oil and potentially other oils. So even if the olive oil itself isn't rancid, potentially the other oils that they mixed it with could be rancid. So I started buying, number one, I started looking for production date, and I actually heard this separately, I believe, but a lot of the olive oil that gets imported into the United States from, say, like Italy or Spain is already so close to being rancid because of the time that it just takes to get here,
Yeah.
that it's often not worthwhile to buy an imported olive oil anyways. And so I started looking for production dates, obviously, that were like within the last year. Um, and then I've been buying olive oil that's California grown.
Yeah, that was
Be-
the other thing I was gonna add. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, because it's much closer and obviously getting to Colorado much sooner. So that was the thing. That was a big change that I made after reading this the first time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, she said look for 100% California olive oil or 100% Italian olive oil.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a difference?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I didn't really grow up eating olive oil. My mom was a butter
Okay.
person. And she didn't like the flavor of olive oil, and that's maybe because she'd only ever had rancid olive
Maybe
oil.
so, yeah.
And so I really enjoy olive oil now, and I eat it a lot more in its raw form
Yeah.
than I used to.
Mhm. Awesome, that's really interesting to know.
Yeah.
I didn't I never put a ton of thought into this in particular, but there are times when I'm like, "Wow, this olive oil is really good," or I think, "This is olive oil is too has a weird taste."
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever put it together that it was rancid,
Mhm.
but I definitely kind of go back and forth on olive oil. I'm not 100% sold on it.
Mhm.
And so I was really this was encouraging information because now I can know
Yeah.
what to actually look for.
Yeah. One thing that I like that she said, particularly about olive oils, that she said, if somebody gifts you an expensive bottle of olive oil, use it. Don't treat it like wine where you
Yeah.
should save it for a special occasion. If somebody gives you nice, expensive olive oil, use it because it's only good for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and now that you know that, yeah, because I think it is easy to be like, "Oh, this was expensive, I'll save it for a special
Yeah, I'm
occasion."
going
It's
to make
like,
a special meal or something.
yes.
No,
No way.
use it all the time.
Yes.
So, moving on to a different type of fat, butter is another one. And one thing that I thought was interesting, which I guess I kind of knew this, but I'll be honest, I don't really follow this rule, which is that she suggests you use unsalted butter for cooking. And I pretty much only buy salted butter because I use the same butter for cooking as I use for just like buttering bread.
Yeah.
And I don't really like unsalted butter if I'm buttering bread.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat. And I did read that, and that was something that I thought, it might really, really matter if you're a chef at a restaurant
Yeah.
and, like, the quantities of butter and things like that that you're using for the recipes that you're making, especially, like, even baking,
Yeah.
and just being able to very much control the amount of salt that you add to your recipe. But I also am in the same position. I buy pretty much one kind of butter, and it's salted, and occasionally I buy unsalted for a particular recipe, but most of the time I'm using butter. But I would say I cook savory food. I wanna add something because last episode about salt, I said that I was gonna be convinced that science was baking was science, and I think that because I'm not a baker, I tend to like to have a little bit more freedom because I like to have a little bit more freedom over the recipes that I cook for meals, and so when I say that I like it's hard for me to think this baking is a science, it's because I just like to cook savory food and not desserts.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much freedom and creativity, in my opinion, in that it's hard for me to transfer those skills over to baking because there isn't that freedom.
Yeah.
So, like I said, this book is convincing me that it is a science and it's good. But all that to say is I actually backed what I was saying. Is I primarily cook with oils.
Mhm.
I don't cook with butter very often. So I think that's probably where it doesn't matter as much to me because I'm reaching for oil when I'm cooking more often than I'm reaching for butter.
Mm. Yeah, I would say it's honestly not consistent what I use. Sometimes it's just what's more handy, right?
Mm,
Like what's
mhm.
closer to the stove. What am I going to do? Sometimes I'll do a little mixy and do like, a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of olive oil. That's actually something that I learned from my husband's uncle. Like he worked at a restaurant as a chef at a restaurant for a really long time. And when he sautés onions and peppers, that's what he does, is he does half olive oil and half butter. And so I kind of was like, well, if that's what he does, then I'm going to try that too.
Yeah, I guess I actually do use butter when I saute onions and other things.
Yeah. If I'm making scrambled eggs, I always use butter because the flavor of butter with scrambled eggs is just like heavenly to me. So,
That's awesome. Every oil has a different heating temperature, has a different smoke point. So she does go into this and shares like, when you should put things into a pan when the pan's already hot, and when you should put things into the pan that when it's cold, and what temperature things can be cooked at, like whatever temperature they can be cooked at, really matters with different oils.
Mhm.
And this is something that I did know, so I tend to use an oil that has a higher smoke point, but it's really helpful the way she breaks it down, I thought, because it's like, here's what you're cooking, you're gonna use this oil. Here's what you're
Mhm.
cooking, this is how hot you're gonna need to get that so you can actually cook it and your chicken's not greasy at the end of the
Mm.
cooking time. And I thought all that information I thought was really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, this was the chapter when I originally read it where I learned to preheat your pan without anything in it. We talked about this earlier in the year to preheat your pan before you add anything to it and then adding your fat and letting it like get warm, but not to the point of it smoking or
Mhm.
anything. Because I had previously, somebody in my life had told me that if you turn a pan on the stove without anything in it, you're going to burn your pan, which was maybe like an old nonstick Teflon issue or
Mhm.
something, I don't know, but I use stainless steel and cast iron pans, so it's not an issue. And she also says something that's really interesting. So if you preheat your pan and you add your fat to the pan and you don't give your fat enough time to warm up, the thing that you're looking for is when you put stuff inside the pan, you wanna hear that, like, sizzle in the oil if you're going for, like, that crispy texture. But if the fat isn't warm enough, the food will absorb the fat, and then you kinda get left with something that's, like, a little more, like, soggy rather than having, like, a firmer, crispy texture. Like, I made meatballs the other night, and this was, like I had just read this, and so that was a really good time for me to, like I heated my pan, I put the butter in, and then waited for it to heat up before I put the meatballs in. Okay, so I put the meatballs in and they were sizzling, but I realized because I had read this, like, oh, if it wouldn't have been sizzling, my meatball would have just like sucked up some of that fat, and then you would get kind of like a gloopy meatball.
Yeah. Well, and then I think it all absorbs into your food. I mean, there's nothing
Exactly.
left in the pan.
Yeah.
If you're using it as a non-stick agent, then it
Yeah.
all or, like, not even crispness aside, if it's just help you not have your food stick to the pan, then it's all gonna absorb into your food, and then your food's gonna stick anyway because it's all inside of your
Right.
food that you're cooking.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
haven't we all done that
Yes.
before where you're like, "I put so much butter into this pan, why did it absorb into all of the food?" Well, probably it wasn't hot enough to begin with to actually, like, coat your food rather than absorb into your food.
Yeah, I recently did this with mushrooms, and they were
Yeah.
fairly soggy,
Mushrooms
when
can be so challenging to get
yeah.
crispy.
Yeah, they tasted pretty good, but they were pretty soggy at the end of the cooking time, so sadly. So she talks about different emulsions. That's another section. And an emulsion, think about mayonnaise, vinaigrette, like a salad dressing. Ice cream is an emulsion. If it's creamy and rich, it's an emulsion. That's what she says. Um, I love things that are creamy and rich. So like decadent sounds good. Have you ever made your own mayonnaise?
I have tried before, I've never been successful.
I used to clean this woman's house in college, and she made her own mayonnaise, and I thought she was nuts.
Yeah.
This was a long time ago, and she would make it weekly. She would make it every week, and she'd make it in a food processor, and she made it look so easy.
Yeah.
And basically, they just were like, the flavor of this is so much better than a store bought, any kind of mayonnaise store bought. So we just are like they're addicted to it. Basically, is how she would say it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was like my first I mean, probably the first time I ever realized you could even make your own mayonnaise.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds sad, but you can. It's so easy. It really is. I make a lot of aiolis at home and they just come together really beautifully. I use an immersion blender and it really does work super well. And an aioli is a mayonnaise just with flavor. Like
Yeah.
flavorings added. So I mean mayonnaise is just the base of any of aiolis. So
Right. Yeah, I have tried to I think well, so I've tried to make regular mayonnaise before, and I've also tried to make fermented mayonnaise before.
oh interesting.
And for whatever I feel like one of the I think I read the recipe wrong and added way too much lemon juice or something, and then it was hard to come back from because it
Yeah.
was just, like, too sour.
Yeah, she talks a lot about the balance to make the emulsion where it's balanced and thick and not falling
Mhm.
apart and basically coming back apart. It's a really tricky balance to strike.
Mhm. Yeah.
What makes it fermented mayonnaise?
I don't remember. It was, Monica Corrado that we had on the podcast a
Mhm.
couple different times. It was one of her recipes for making fermented condiments, and so I don't know if there's anything different about the recipe itself compared to a regular mayonnaise, but, like, you let it sit out on the counter for either just overnight or it's for, like, 2 days. It's not very long
Okay.
that you need to let it sit out for it to ferment, but then it gets its own, like, cultures in
Yeah,
it
yeah.
so that it's, like, better for your gut.
Awesome. I have yeah. So look that up. So the second half of this chapter is a lot about baked goods, tart doughs, shortbread, pie dough, tart dough. And I loved this section, but as someone who's gluten free, it also made me really sad because this is the section that I would love to be able to implement, but I can't. But I just really enjoyed hearing about how each of these different types of like how you add fat to a pastry makes it have the texture that you want it to have. So if you want, the croissant like flaky layers, you're going to want to like layer your pastry with your butter and layer and layer and layer. You're going to mix them together in a certain way. You're going to add it at a certain time at a different temperature. I got a lot out of her talking about like melting butter for cookies versus using softened butter for cookies. And you're going to get a completely different texture of cookie. And I live at a high altitude, so I struggle with my cookies anyway, and so I am one who is very impatient, and I felt like when I read that, I thought, "Yeah, that's me. I'm a microwave the butter girl because I just wanna get it done."
Yeah.
And she has this whole story in here about being a kid and not being able to wait for the butter to soften for the cookie dough, and I thought, "Oh, she's talking to me because that is totally me. I never wanna wait. I'm always just like, I'm gonna do this right now, not in 3 hours."
Yeah.
But now I'm very encouraged, like, let the butter get to that soft, spreadable stage and not melt it because you're totally changing the molecular structure of the butter when you do that,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't work as well to get that beautiful cookie.
Makes me think of the things that America's Test Kitchen often posts on their social media where they'll give you like 12 different cookies and they were all baked with something different. And usually it's like the one in the center is like the ideal,
Yeah,
but then there's like one where it's like the butter was too warm and the butter was too cold, or it had a more flour compared to butter ratio, or more butter, yeah, whatever, opposite of that. Or, like, maybe you accidentally added baking powder instead of baking soda, and, like, this is what a cookie would look like then. This is kind of what this chapter made me think of. Granted, that was more things than just the fat, but that's kinda what this made me think of, was that, like, it is really technical to get yourself to that perfect cookie, because some of these other factors that, like, most baking recipes, is just implied that, like, your eggs should be at room temperature and your
right.
butter should be at room temperature. We learned that from our blogger Anna when we
Yes.
interviewed her on the podcast. And so, like, there's all these little, like, nuances and tweaks, and that's what a lot of this information here felt like to me. It's not super hard, you just have to do it the correct way.
Yes. Yes, and like I said, I'm a little bit of a free spirit in the kitchen, and I think I just wanna do it to get it done and to, like, make progress and, like, see something to come to fruition, and so reading here's the technical correct way to use fat, here's the correct way to use butter in these recipes to get the desired end goal, I was very encouraged to, like, stick to those nuanced rules.
Yeah.
And we've talked a bit about butter already, but I wanna add, she has this lovely thing, I'm just gonna read it to you. One of my favorite poets, Seamus Heaney, once described butter as coagulated sunlight, which might be the most elegant and economical way to describe its special alchemy. To begin with, it's the only animal fat made without killing an animal. Cows, goats, and sheep eat grass, a product of sunlight and photosynthesis, to deliver us milk. We skim the richest cream off the top and churn it into it till it transforms into butter. The process is so straightforward that kids can make butter by shaking a glass jar filled with chilled cream. Just if you weren't convinced to read the book, here we are. This is what a beautiful paragraph. And just even referencing it being coagulated sunlight, it's made out of sunlight. It's this beautiful fat that we get from an animal, and we didn't have to sacrifice the animal for that. And I just think it's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, she has such a great way with words.
Such a beautiful ways, of writing.
Well, she sort of finishes off the chapter. She talks more about, so she has some similarities between the salt chapter, where she talks about potential ways that you would layer fat similar to how you would layer salt, and then she talks about balancing fat in the way that, like, maybe you some I don't want to say you over fatted something. But say you have a little bit too much fat, like you have like some like greasy food or something, And she said really the way to balance it is very similar to salt. If you oversalted food, you want to try and dilute the food that you have. So like increase the total volume of the food. You might try adding some acid. You might water it down a little bit, or you could even add some like starchy or dense ingredients. So I think a common example is like you have a greasy soup, you could add potatoes to it, and the potatoes help kind of soak up some of that
Right.
greasiness. So it's not just like a puddle of grease. She also mentions you can put things in, if you have the time for it, of course. You could put things in the refrigerator and wait for the layer of fat to kind of congeal at the top so you could skim it off.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, if they don't have that richness, if something is too dry, you can always correct it by adding some fat.
Yeah.
Like it's like adding sour cream to a baked potato. That
Mhm.
idea. Like it's pretty dry by itself. You add that and it's a beautiful, creamy, has a richness about it. If you are a baker, this section is really beautifully helpful in regards to how to use fat in pastry. So, if you're interested in reading this section, I would highly recommend it because it just really talks about the way your butter needs to be in all these different types of pastries and really perfect that skill. I feel like I got a lot out of that.
Yeah. I would say that that's I would say overall this chapter is a little more focused on the baking than it is
Mhm.
on the cooking. As far as the practical tips that she gives, the general overview of fat and the way that it contributes to flavor and texture is really informative and helpful. There's almost a part of it that feels slightly overwhelming to me because it's unlike salt. Salt to me just was very interesting, almost felt a little more straightforward,
Mhm.
whereas the idea of fat and, like, choosing the correct fat and thinking about the type of cuisine that it is, there's an element of it that felt a little like, "This is a lot, and this is a lot to remember," you know?
Mhm.
Like, I feel to me, this feels more like a chapter that I will reference
Yes.
more frequently because I won't be able to retain all of this information.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'm not really a baker. I just said it a few minutes
Mhm.
ago, and so I think that for me, I feel like fat in cooking makes a lot of sense, like, with the skills that I currently
Yeah.
have, but when I expand my skills or when I begin to cook, just with a different flavor profile from a different country or something like that, this is such a helpful tool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll reference it again, but the world map of what fat for what part of the world,
Mhm.
because that can completely change the game in what you're making. Because, I feel like I've eaten, pick an Asian cuisine out, and it's amazing. You go home and you try to make it, and I just feel like I can never get that quite right, and so I feel
Mhm.
like this is a good starting point. It's a base layer.
Yeah.
Like, get this part right, and everything you build on top of this fat is gonna be much better, much
Yeah.
more correct.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that wraps it up for the section on fat. In 2 weeks, we're going to be going over acid. So if you're reading along with us, now's the time to break out the book and read that section. We're going to transition into some dinner dilemmas. JB writes in to say they need help with picky kid eaters that don't eat tomatoes, and this person has little time to cook.
Well, first of all, I'm a broken record over here. But the picky eating, I am just gonna always send you to Katie Kimball. I'm gonna send you to Katie Kimball's TED Talks, which you can find on YouTube. I'm gonna send you to our podcast with Katie Kimball. She is a gem. She is a resource, and she is a like lifesaver to families who have kids who are picky eaters. That's a great place to start. I
Yeah.
am not an expert in this. As a parent, I have implemented a lot of the things I've learned from Katie. And it's almost too much information to even share right here in this dinner dilemma. But I'm gonna say that she'll be an amazing asset for you as you navigate the picky eating. And will open up your world to a lot more food options, which is gonna be huge.
Right. Because I think that as we discussed a couple episodes in our 100th episode when we talked about Katie again, is that it might not be about the food. It might be about some sensory
Mhm.
issues. There could be a lot of like additional things that it's not really common knowledge, I would say, a lot of the reasons that kids are picky eaters.
Yeah, one of the ones that comes to mind is just that it's like 18 interactions. You have to have 18 interactions with the food before you're even comfortable to potentially
Right.
taste it.
Mhm.
And she would classify as an interaction as like looking at it on the plate and
Mhm.
having it on your own plate or maybe chopping it. And so sometimes it could just be about the reps that you have with a food. And so if your kid I don't know, hates tomatoes, just this continuing to put them in, unless there's an allergy, right? Or some kind of dietary issue with tomatoes, just kind of continuing to put it in their atmosphere and not removing it and saying this is a food off limits, but just continuing to kind of put it in their atmosphere. That actually might be a really helpful thing. Even if they never eat it, I wouldn't expect them to eat it for quite a long time, but just kind of getting that familiarity with like, this is a food that I'm familiar with, getting those reps in with the food. I mean, in Katie's expertise opinion, that's a really important step with
Mhm.
foods that we choose not to consume.
Right. once again, we don't know if this no tomatoes is that there's a tomato allergy or if
Yeah.
tomatoes just isn't a preferred food. I would say that a good portion of the recipes that I make don't include tomatoes. If you're somebody who the recipes that you are your normal go-tos are things like spaghetti or pizza or chili, all of those things tend to be pretty tomato heavy, but there are lots of other great options out there. I really think that this is a scenario where you could do a super quick Google search of your favorite recipe, no tomatoes,
Mhm.
or even just recipes, no tomatoes. If it's a nightshade issue overall, there are also lots of resources for no
Absolutely.
nightshade
Yeah.
recipes.
Yeah.
And I think like AIP recipes in general are no nightshade. So you could also look into like AIP cookbooks and stuff.
AIP stands for Autoimmune Protocol.
Yeah. And then I think the saying you have little time to cook, this is similar to one of the dilemmas that we talked about last time. We gave lots of resources last time. So if you didn't listen to last episode, go check that one out. I think one of the things that we didn't mention because our other listener, part of their issue was they were constantly on the go and a lot of their time that they could have spent cooking was spent with children's activities, kids' activities. But just having only a little time to cook, one of the things that I didn't mention was, like, the idea of dump dinners, which is terrible
It's a
sounding. I
terrible
do
name.
not like the phrase of that, but they're basically crock pot meals, and you just dump everything in your crock pot. A lot of times, they're only, like, 5 to 7 ingredients. They're very few on ingredients. You just set it for the day, and then dinner is literally ready. It's not one of those crock pot meals where you then need to, like, make a little something extra to go along with it. You could make some rice or something maybe if you really wanted to, but you could also buy pre-cooked of any of those things. Um, but I feel like the crock pot dump dinners super helpful, and you can also freeze those so that then you just have it frozen and then it's pull it out of the freezer, put it into your crock pot, bingo bongo.
Yeah. Another thing that would be really helpful for the no time to cook is one pot meals, one pan, like
Yeah.
one pot, one pan. So we have in the Plan to Eat recipe book, like in the blog on in your account, you can find all of those recipes. I'll have Ronnie link to it or link to a note in the show notes so that we can find that really easily. But there was probably 30 recipes in there that were one pot, one pan. Some of them took longer than others, but 15-minute dinners. I'm not exactly sure the amount of time you're working with, but there are many 15-minute dinner recipes that I throw together at my house, that are, like, just quick to put together, whether it's some kind of salad with a bunch of just pre-chopped veggies, maybe something you throw in the air fryer to, like, popcorn shrimp or, something like that, and you just put together, like, a rice bowl or something like that. These don't take a very long time. Um, you could even have, like, microwavable rice. Like, you've got these pieces of the puzzle that come together to make a really delicious dinner, but they don't take you a lot of time to cook. You've done a little bit of, you've outsourced a little bit of the cooking for pre-chopped veggies or pre-cooked rice or something like that. It's gonna be helpful in making those meals come together. I'm sitting here thinking that actually no tomatoes. I would encourage you that no tomato recipes is actually, um, fairly achievable.
Yeah.
I don't wanna say easy, I don't wanna say simple, I would say it's achievable. Everything that Ronnie just mentioned, pizza, you can make that with an olive oil base instead of with a tomato sauce. You could make it with an olive oil base. You can make it with an Alfredo base, like a white sauce base. You can make
Or
it
a
with a ranch
pesto.
pesto. You can make it with ranch dressing as a base. You make the rest of your pizza the same. You just don't start with tomatoes.
Yeah.
She said chili. You can make a no tomato chili. You can make a green chili. A lot of Mexican food, like you don't even have to have salsa. You could have enchilada sauce made out of tomatillos. I'm not sure. Again, we don't know if it's a nightshade issue, so it's hard for us to speak to this being a choice or a need. But I think there's actually a lot of recipes out there that you can say, well, I love spaghetti, but I can't have that. Okay, let's make Alfredo instead, or let's make a really beautiful like an olive oil based sauce with basil and some kind of maybe a grilled chicken. You don't have to. You can use pepper and cheese in that sauce. You don't have to be using tomatoes. So I would say that I would try to move the no tomatoes thing to a lower stress item,
Mhm.
and I do think it's pretty achievable to eat a lot of recipes without tomatoes.
Totally, I agree.
This is from Tanya. When we fall off the planning wagon and we end up on the merry-go-round of what's for dinner, we can do this for hours and then we end up spending money on takeout or eating crap food. Preach, sis.
Haven't we all been there? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been there.
Yes, so I think that I mean, clearly solution to the problem is to make meal planning more of a habit. Maybe easier said than done because you said you're sometimes on the planning wagon and then you fall off the planning wagon. Potentially I'm thinking that there's maybe like a trigger here of something that maybe happens that's causing you to fall off the planning wagon. Like, is it a really stressful time? Is it vacation like we talked about last time? Is there something where you feel like this is a repetitive thing and you can maybe pinpoint what the thing is that makes you fall off the planning wagon? And I'm only saying this to maybe help you recognize, like, "Ooh, we're kinda getting into the danger zone, and I need to, like, reel it in a little bit here to, like, make sure that I stick with my meal planning because whenever this stressful thing happens, I tend to get off my meal planning and then everything else falls apart." So, I think maybe, like, the first thing that I wanna ask is just, like, what's happening whenever you're falling off the meal planning wagon, and what can you do to, like, mitigate that a little bit?
Yeah, it's great. One of the things that I thought of when I read this is it's very difficult to know that you have to decide what you're gonna have for dinner every day for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
We can't think about it like that though, right? Like that is a danger. That is stepping off the cliff, right?
Yeah.
That is instead of like I get to decide what I'm gonna have for dinner instead of like I have to decide. One of the ways that I mitigate this and I need to use more often is menus, is saving menus with meals that my family loves that I can just reuse. So then
Mhm.
when I get into that danger zone of like, I don't want to cook and I don't know what to make and nobody will tell me what they want to eat because who everybody's been there. I just drag and drop the rest of the meal plan onto my menu
Yeah.
and it's already done for me. If you haven't saved menu, just scroll back a couple of weeks in your meal plan and see what did we eat. Listening to too many voices
Mhm.
sometimes can overwhelm you. I'm sitting here thinking like potentially you have older kids and everyone's like, no, that doesn't sound good. No, that doesn't sound good. No, that
Mhm.
doesn't sound good. But if it's up to you, I would say maybe don't ask. Like maybe say,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. I got it. That for me on those nights when I don't want to cook and when nobody knows what to make and we're kind of at the end of our meal plan and I haven't gone shopping, that's usually when I go to my default, pantry meal. At my house, it is so often white chicken chili that my family probably doesn't even like it anymore, but it comes together really quickly in my crock pot. It's something I can throw in to the crock pot in the morning or on a pot in a pot on the stove at the end of the day. But if I know I've got a busy day ahead and I also don't know what's for dinner, it's gonna be my default. And then I don't really ask anybody. I just do it. Maybe I'll make some quesadillas to go with it so that everybody's kinda happy because my kids really like quesadillas. But I just don't ask. I just do the next thing, and it is, "Okay, I've got this food in my pantry. I'm gonna put this in my crock pot, and then I'm gonna meal plan later so we're not off track
Yeah.
again."
Yeah, I think right there at the end, you're bringing up a good point is like get to the point where the immediate problem is solved, which is like figure out what's for dinner tonight and then do your future self a favor and go and make your next meal plan so that you don't get caught in this cycle of everybody being like, we don't know what to eat. We don't know what's for dinner. And, it becomes an argument or just becomes like ugh, we don't even want to talk about it
Yes,
anymore.
yeah. Just eat a peanut butter and jelly. Yeah. Or go
Exactly.
out. I think, I would say if your family likes to go out to eat, I would say schedule that in. So, like,
Right.
make your meal plan, especially if the meal planning gets exhausting. Make your meal plan in the last night of so I meal plan on Sundays. Every week, I meal plan on Sundays, but sometimes I don't have time to go to the grocery store on Monday, so Monday nights are sometimes our eating out night.
Mhm.
Sunday nights or Monday nights are usually our eating out night. So I'm thinking, "Okay, just gotta get to that eating out night where I get a break, I get to enjoy something out, and I'm gonna meal plan that day, and then be prepared for the next day's meals."
Right.
I would say try to use the eating out not as a punishment for not meal planning. Look at it as a reward at the end of a long week of meal planning, and then try to almost reframe it. Like, no, this is a choice. We budgeted for it.
Mm.
My time is budgeted for it because I haven't meal planned yet, or I'm gonna do that today, and then go on and enjoy it. And then don't feel like you're having to like sacrifice money and time on eating out because you didn't make a meal plan. Kind of flip the script on that.
Mhm. I also think given that idea, because I do a similar thing, like I create a meal plan and usually we have a night of the week or something that we have planned to go out to eat. And I'm always like well, okay, I shouldn't say always. Sometimes I am stretching my meal plan just so that we can get to Friday night or
Totally.
something, right? And so rather than going back to the grocery store and buying more things, or rather than going out to eat an extra night during the week, I just start to throw things together. We bust out all of the pantry meals. I'm digging in the back of the cupboards to figure out what we have that we can make. So, like, that's another option that, like, you're part of your problem here is that you say they end up spending more money and you get takeout or you're eating what you consider to be crap food. And I actually think that you can do a lot at your house to mitigate that. I mean, a beans and rice type of a night. You can do, something like a breakfast for dinner kind of a thing. Like, there are so many options that I bet if you just started to think about it maybe a little bit more creatively when you're at your house and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have a meal plan. And hey, I'm just so stressed out about it. Like, just start pulling stuff out of the fridge, pulling stuff out of the cupboard and
Yeah.
make something new.
That's great feedback too. I wanna add that Ronnie has a very limited pantry
Oh,
space.
yeah.
So, I just wanna say that if you are somebody who's sitting here listening and saying, "Well, I keep nothing at home," Ronnie is also one who does not keep anything at home, very
Yep.
minimal extras. I live quite away from town, so we do have a bit more pantry staples and storage available. And I do that because we get a lot of bad weather and we get all these things. And so we live a long way from the grocery store and from restaurants. So it's really difficult for us to be like, oh, we're just going to do takeout because
Mhm.
takeout is an hour away.
Right.
And so I would say I want to say that Ronnie's giving this advice from a place of having very minimal storage. And I think it's a great idea. We'll call that leftover night
Mhm.
or everyone just gets to make their own thing that
Yeah.
night, and, yeah, I don't normally do the, like, short order cook thing where everybody gets something different, but there are nights where that's totally fine.
Yeah. All right. I think we got time to answer one more here. All right. John from Florida says, I have specific macros that I need to hit each day based on my scheduled workouts. Trying to find quick, tasty, and meal preppable meals can be very difficult.
Well, John from Florida, you have asked 2 people who hopefully can help you because we both tracked macros, we both have experience with this.
Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know what that means, it means that he is eating a specific breakdown of the macronutrients, carbs, fat, and protein. He has a goal for every day that he's trying to hit, and so each meal you have to be particular about what you eat at each meal because you're trying to divide that day number into 3 meals or 3 meals and some snacks. You don't wanna go over, and you don't wanna go under in most cases because a lot of people who track macros are trying to specifically reach enough protein every day. They're specifically some people are trying to bulk. It isn't just a weight loss tool. Some people are trying to bulk, so they're trying to eat more to build more muscle. So that's a bit of an overview of what macro tracking is.
Yeah. And let's be honest, this style of eating can get very monotonous and very boring. At least, maybe not so much anymore. I feel like there's a lot more tools and resources nowadays. But like when I was macro tracking, it's like you're eating chicken and broccoli and rice, or you're eating tilapia and asparagus and rice.
Well, and the reason for that, for anyone listening, is because weighing and measuring and tracking your food can be very tedious. So it's a lot easier to eat the same thing over and over again because it does take a bit of that burden off.
Right.
So what I want to add real quick, if you did not know, Plan to Eat has nutritional data, which makes every recipe you can calculate the nutritional data based on the serving size. It'll give you a nutrient breakdown based on a particular serving of a recipe. So if you add in lasagna and you add in every single ingredient, you say it's for serving 6, you calculate the nutritional data in Plan to Eat, it'll give you a breakdown of what one serving of that recipe, what the breakdown, the carb, fat, protein breakdown is. And as someone who tracks macros actively right now, it's super helpful for me. I usually backtrack from dinner if I can, because that's the meal where I'm eating with my family or I'm eating out. Usually I'm making a bulk meal like that I'm serving in
Hmm.
portion sizes. And so that it just makes it a little bit easier for me because it's already, I can just track it. I can see all the ingredients I put into it. I can just divide, I can just say, okay, this is how much my serving will be. I work backwards from dinner, and then the other 2 meals of my day can be a bit more boring or a bit more monotonous, and then I just get to have that, freedom at dinner time because 'cause I've already tracked it, and the rest of the meals I just kind of work around whatever I'm making, and then it feels a lot less restrictive.
Yeah. So I think as far as trying to find some of these quick and tasty and meal preppable meals, I mean, honestly, I think the go-to is like going to Instagram or TikTok. There are tons of people who are influencers out there who are making crockpot recipes with specific macros. And they're putting 7 chicken breasts into a crock pot with, a few other ingredients, and they're telling you the exact breakdowns of it. I think as far as trying to trying to find recipes, there are so many more resources out there now than there used to be. And I think specifically on social media, there are tons and tons of people who this is the one thing that they do on the internet is they show you videos of them making their like quick meal prep, whether they're crock pot recipes or their sheet pan recipes, and then they're showing you how they divvy it up into different portions so that they can eat it, a couple different days. I personally think there's a ton of recipes out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is something this content is hopping on the internet right now.
Yeah.
Um, so just we can throw out some ideas. Like Ronnie said, like she ate a lot of meals with rice. That it's something where you can prep a protein and prep the rice and then add different sauces every single day, add different veggies every single day. You could roast veggies, you could have fresh veggies. You can make it a cold rice salad with some veggies and some chicken, or you could have a hot rice bowl with shrimp and sauteed mushrooms and things like that. You can kind of have some of those main things pre-prepped.
Yeah.
I've recently been really liking to do baked potatoes and then putting the baked potatoes in my fridge, and then reusing them, whether that is for a breakfast bowl with a baked potato as the base, or whether I had a buffalo chicken baked potato recently that was really good. I had a taco baked potato. Like, that sounds bizarre, but, like, I'm using this one
Mm,
thing as a base.
sounds so good.
I'm not eating rice, I'm adding all the yummy toppings to it. I recently made a chicken salad out of a rotisserie chicken, and I used Greek yogurt instead of mayonnaise as the
Mhm.
base, and it was a buffalo chicken salad, so it had buffalo sauce in it. It really masked the flavor of the Greek yogurt. I do like Greek yogurt, but it did not have any of that tanginess that Greek
Mhm.
yogurt can have, so if you're concerned about that, it made the chicken salad, like, double the protein it would have had otherwise, and I wasn't using so my fat was lower, but I used a rotisserie chicken, so it was kind of it was a balanced,
Mhm.
chicken salad. That's something I've been eating all week this week. Any other ideas you can think of?
I mean, you mentioned rotisserie chicken, which I think is always a good option if you're trying to go for something that's quick. You can also I think every single grocery store I've ever been in has a section where they have, like, a pre-chopped veggies, they're, like, wrapped up. So, if part of the time crunch for you is that you don't have time to prep things, like a rotisserie chicken and the pre-chopped veggies that you can put in the oven and roast as you're, taking apart your rotisserie chicken to eat it, that is a huge time saver. We always talk about frozen vegetables and being able to utilize those because they most of the time they're already pre-chopped and prepped and just like ready for you to cook them.
You could pre-portion, smoothie ingredients or protein shake ingredients,
Yeah.
so you can get all these little bags out and you can measure out your half a cup of fruit or whatever, whatever your measurements are, and then while it just might be a different thing to do one week, it kinda keeps things interesting, a little less monotonous if you had maybe a different kind of fruit in each one for this next coming week, and then you added your protein powder to the little bag, you added you could even add the ice cubes into it, you could add your spinach, whatever you put into
Mhm.
your protein shake or your smoothie, and then put those in the freezer, and then you pull them out, they're prepped, quick to come together,
Yeah,
keep it a
that's
little interesting.
that's a great idea. I'm thinking about this word tasty as well because Riley mentioned sauces, which I think sauces are an amazing idea to make sure that your food is flavorful. I think sometimes, particularly when you're doing meal prep, which maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but if you're doing meal prep, I feel like sometimes the idea of seasoning your food sometimes it gets lost in the mix and you make chicken that feels kind of bleh, kind of bland because it wasn't seasoned very well, or like whatever meat it is that you might be eating. We talked about another idea related to this. I'm kind of on the chicken idea right now. If you're making your own chicken breasts, Riley mentioned this specifically in a few episodes ago about getting a meat thermometer and making sure you have a meat thermometer so you don't overcook your chicken because that is the fastest way to
Ruin
not
it.
like chicken anymore
Yeah.
because it'll just be dry and you will be drinking a sip of water in between every bite of chicken. So, part of it might also be learning a few like cooking techniques to make sure that your food is tasty when you cook it.
Mm. One last thing I'll add, if you're headed out to Instagram to find some good recipes, if you like cottage cheese, there's a lot of sauces right now that are cottage cheese based,
Right.
and I've tried some of them recently, and I've actually been pretty impressed. Like, you blend the cottage cheese up until it's smooth, so it's not chunky, and then you add different seasonings to it. You can make ranch this way. I made a dill pickle dip recently this way,
Mm.
and it adds to the protein and it cuts some of those other things out that you might not be wanting to consume and gives you something kind of interesting and maybe a little different to do on your different meal preps.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, cottage cheese having a moment right now.
It is having a moment. We can have a whole conversation about cottage cheese.
I think so. Okay, awesome. Well, that is it for this episode. We will be back in 2 weeks to break down the acid section of salt, fat, acid, and heat. And as always, thank you so much for listening to the Plant Tea Podcast.